Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, all three, Jeff, John, and Richard. I'm speechless. The richness of your sharing is deep and wide, and is really things to think of and pondered and carry in our hearts to drill deep into our consciousness. We could have the next few minutes. It's 11:45, so we barely have 15 minutes unless people want to stay a little longer till 12:15. I think we'll open the floor now for anyone who would like to comment or ask a question to any one of our wonderful panelists, or to all three of them. We have the reactions here. You can raise hand if there is more than one person trying to speak. I'm going to close my microphone and so that you can jump in.
John Banyan. Some of the observations that I see when I get more involved in the way the Western traditions practicing Buddhism. The three refuges, I think over here it transformed to be some sort of vow to take. But back in our mind, at least in Asian, I think it's more like a declaration. It's like, I've been wandering on the road or at least in some other houses, but now I declare I live in the house of the Buddha with the Sangha community. That's what the three refuges meant to us. In terms of the practicing the precepts, we're very strict in practicing it, especially in the Theravada tradition. Here, I think because partially because of the roots we have, the respect we have in the social order. Over here in the state, it's a little bit more relaxed. And I think when Buddhism just started into the Western world, the master emphasized more on trying to spread the Dharma. So the requirements on the precept is more lax, and I guess that's some sort of skillful mean because of the way the Western world behaves. It emphasizes more on the personal freedom. In the Asian culture, as you can see from the movies Mulan, that the benefits of the community is above the benefits of the family, and the benefits of the family is always above your own personal benefits. So we're operating that way. So following the precept is easier. It's not going to have much trouble following the precepts. And also when a person asks, like a member of the monastic, to take the refuge and the 5 precepts, normally the monastic member would say, okay, I'll note that, but they leave a period of observance to make sure that the person is qualified, the behavior and commitment to take the 3 refuges and the precept. I think that is probably similar in the Tibetan tradition also. So my experience is that when I first heard about the DTO classes, so I told Master Chi Huang, yeah, I'm interested in attending the class. And then I didn't even realize until much later, I think Sandra or Alex asked me that Chi Huang seemed to give you a hard time before you are taking this class. Yeah, he gave me like various chores around the temples. But to me, it is normal because that is what I expect happening in the Asian culture. They tested you, make sure you are committed before they accept you into whatever program. I think that was the way that how we work. And here it a little more relaxed. That's why I think when I think one of the book that Elena cited is the Buddhist Ethics for Everyday Life by Thich Nhat Hanh. I found the Vietnamese copy because it's free. So I read through that, and I think his suggestion is that, yeah, at the beginning, all the rules are relaxed here in the Western world. So now we're understanding the teaching. We get, what the teachings was about. It's time for us to start tightening and reinforcing those precepts. But I think in the West, in the Eastern, especially in the monastic precepts, it's very strict. But in the Western world, we somehow have to adapt some of the precept. Monastic, for example, if you are a monastic member, you cannot handle money. So in the Western world, that's almost like impossible. My previous abbot in my temple, he has an MBA. He wants to run the temple as a business. How can he not be handling money? So there are some precepts that I think we need to adjust in the Western world. But yeah, some other precept is more general and it contributes to your practice. I think we should, looking back and see, how we practice and get more involved in and strictly practice those more. I think it is for our own benefit. That's what I observed in practicing in the Western world. John Buying out.
So, as far as the refuges, I've always seen that as the religious experience in Buddhism. There's the parable that you're in a burning house and you're at the window and you make the leap, right? And the suffering is the burning house, right? And we make the leap or literally take refuge in the Buddha, which is the example, the Dharma, which is the abiding state of reality, and the Sangha, which is the group of like-minded practitioners who support us in practice, right? We need these things, right? We have these meetings, we have these calls, we sit together when we can. We need these things in order to practice and to make progress. So, at least for me and from my point of view, the refuges are that very religious sort of leap of faith that we take because we think this is the way to alleviate suffering. And then, John, the interesting question you bring up is, on the precepts and the strictness and the influence of Asian and Western cultures is interesting because you start thinking about what is universal, what is absolute, and what is relative, right? Asian traditions coming out of Confucianism, for instance, that you mentioned, versus more of a rugged individualist that we have in the West, right? And Buddhism always had the reputation of adjusting or filling the vessel of wherever it happens to land. But I do think some things are universal, right? Some things are just because we live in this reality, these things stand to reason to be true. Strictness is always a word that I struggle with, because that, I should not, again, maybe this is the Western view. I don't know, John. So it's kind of interesting, but strictness is compelling you to do something, right? And again, there needs to be rules. I totally get that, but it should come also from your practice, right? Kind of like the thing. Now, again, a monastic situation might be different. You have people living together long periods of time, close confinement. There needs to be rules, and I see that. But if it's coming externally, if the majority of your practice is coming from you must, I wonder how sustainable that is.
Sandra, you had your hand up. You can unmute yourself now.
Yeah, I just want to thank Jeff, John, and Richard for all of the vastness of in different perspectives and approaches. I subscribe to the Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, Tricycle, and spirituality and health, and I see I gain so much of the different perspectives from all those different traditions that, and they're short. So it helps me it's easier to read a magazine article than it is to read volumes of all of these different perspectives. But what I thought was interesting was, in your training as a chaplain, you have this model of action, reflection, action. And with the intention of, try something out and then come back and, ask yourself some questions as to how that went and what was the response from the care recipient, et cetera, and then make modifications as a result. Then I read, and I, of course, can't remember now if it was Tricycle or Lion's Roar, but I saw some article that actually talked about that, and from a Buddhist perspective, that it's probably more cited as reflection, action, reflection. And so I think that first reflection is born in the aspiration slash intention part. And, I think I do try and think about before I go out on the floor or before I engage with others. But I am certainly not a master of any part of it. And another thing that's interesting about it is, as I journal, I see how what I am convinced is the correct method or the correct intention changes as I gain more experience and read more perspectives. So yeah, I think it's a big ocean of teachings that don't just dip your toe into, just take a full-on dive, and keeping the Kalamata Sutta in mind of, take what works for you and discard the stuff that's not currently working, but keeping in mind that next week, next moment, that stuff may work. So yeah, awesome presentation, guys. Going out.
John Banyan again. I think the intention of precept is to help you, to guide you to avoid unwholesome actions, and so that you can perform wholesome actions better. So I think precepts laid down from the Buddha time was for those society, those customs, the traditions that fit that environment. So if you take the intention not to have behavior or actions that are unwholesome apply to the West, we need ethics and those that fit the culture over here. So that's like the Dalai Lama. I said, yeah, we got a whole bunch of like 200 some precepts coming from the East, but take what apply to you over here and maybe invent something that fits your environment, that fits your culture. I think that's what yet to be defined by all of us here start participating in practicing Buddhism and see it transform in the Western culture, which I'm finding now.
Hi, Elena Baunin. So, I come from a similar sort of culture like John. I come from Latino culture, and I grew up within that culture. And there too, we have very strict sort of rules of conduct and in terms of authority, in terms of the law, in terms of faith, the practice of the Catholic faith, and all of those elements shape our character, so to speak, as we grow up. So we don't necessarily even think of what we are doing. We just do it automatically, like John mentioned earlier. People, you follow the model and you don't question, and you just, that those ways of life and behaviors become internalized and they become part of you. And being married to a Japanese person who grew up in that tradition also, tells me how, that culture behaves, and their ways of life become internalized as they grow older, as they develop in their own societies. And I think that's the challenge for us in the West when it comes to Buddhism, because now these are principles and vows and precepts and ethics and rules that we have come to face, and we have the opportunity to examine, and we have the opportunity to look at how we have lived like this all our lives. We have obeyed the law, we haven't killed, we try not to destroy, we try not to cheat, we are taught not to lust over people or things, but we didn't think about it before. Now we are with Buddhism. Buddhism gives us the opportunity to take a close look at all those principles and all those precepts and how they manifest in our lives, and now live them responsibly, live them, not just responsibly in terms of responsibility, but in terms of responsiveness to our, the people around us and our own needs. So I think it is a wonderful opportunity to grow, to learn, the Buddhist vows, and to really take a close look at how we live them consciously. Because I think that is the difference between growing up in an Asian culture or a Latin or all Latin culture, as opposed to growing up in a place like the United States, where there are so many different cultures and so many different variants that people can adopt. We unconsciously follow the rule. Now we are consciously learning why and how and the benefit of those rules. So I think that's the beauty of of the precepts and studying the vows and studying the ethics of Buddhism, it brings them up to our consciousness and makes us responsible. Elena bowing out.
Jeff bowing in. So I thank you for the wonderful teachings discussion today. In particular, Richard, thank you for the insight into the ceremony for taking the Bodhisattva vows in the Tibetan tradition. And you know, one aspect I'd just like to comment on and ask you a question on is the aspect, you know, you go through and there's several elements to the ceremony and it is very deep, and ultimately, you know, taking the Bodhisattva vows, you know, it is a kind of a tremendous vow to take. I mean, it is so, um, you know, it's such a vast vow, and yet, you know, it is not seen as burdensome or weighing you down. And in particular, at the end, the period of rejoicing, I think is just wonderful, and does make me think of the one time I saw the Dalai Lama give a talk in Manhattan. I think some others of us may have been at some, or 15, 20 years ago or more. Just how joyful he was, you know, he gave very deep teaching, but there was just so much laughter in it. So I guess I was just wondering if you could comment a little on that, and if you're willing to share a little bit, you know, what kind of happens during the period of rejoicing at the end there. If you could give an example, I just appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff, for the question. Excuse me. You know, I'll use an example I suspect we can all connect with, which is often at the end of any of our gatherings, particularly when it's not, you know, like our every other week study classes, but when there's something more formal, like an ordination ceremony, or people taking their precepts and vows. I know every time we have our annual gatherings in New York, I wasn't able to make it this time, but Craig was sharing with me how afterwards people just sat down and broke bread together. And there was this wonderful, enthusiastic feeling of just being together in community. I don't think it's much different from that, where we have, you know, a Dharma brother, a Dharma sister takes their initial, their 3 refuges and their 5 precepts. And there's a line near them where each person's coming over to give a hug, a handshake, a word of congratulations. I think the only difference here is that they formally build in like a little space for just stopping to pause and celebrate. And it's not, as I recall, not like a big ordeal beyond just creating that mental space to stop and acknowledge what's happened here, the preciousness of it. And then afterwards, it's a lot of what we've all seen. And it kind of takes on a life of its own at that point. The other thing I'm going to briefly mention, Jeff, only because you mentioned that word vastness. One of the things that I did use the word aspirational several times, and especially when those of you that have not read Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva yet, it sort of alternates between fire and brimstone, sort of old school, urging us along, maybe a little bit toward that polarity of strictness that John was speaking to. and at the other end, a very celebratory, joyous, again, celebration of the path and this bounty that we've inherited through the Dharma. A few years ago, I took, actually twice now, I've taken a course on this particular text with a practitioner who is a professor of Buddhist studies. And he called our attention to these two lines that rarely get much attention. So there are many quotes out of Shantideva. I shared two of them that are widely read and regarded. But this one is the chapter 7 on perseverance. And the two lines read like this: our guide instructs us to begin by giving food or other little charities. And he goes on to use the phrase step by step. And I think that's a good reminder. I think many of us in the West, if anything, we maybe fall into a perfectionistic trap where it's like, yeah, this is really idealized. And, you know, these great masters, yeah, they're there to share the lineage with me, but surely I can't measure up. And that's an unfortunate attitude if it's not sort of remedied and corrected. And I think I'm very grateful to this instructor for pointing this subtle point out, that it is not expected that we're going to be like offering ourselves up, body, mind, and soul, right from the outset, but rather this path is a skill to be cultivated like any other. There's a teacher in the Tibetan tradition, Khenpo Tsultrim Rinpoche, who's very highly regarded, and he has a phrase, something to this effect, a saying, erring and erring, I walk the unerring path. In other words, it's acknowledging we will make mistakes along the way. And I think we have to be as kind, gentle, and patient with ourselves as we would be toward others. So your comment on vastness, I had been wanting to get that in. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but thank you.
Yeah, no, you certainly did. Thank you, Richard.
Elena Baunin. So it's 12 and 12 minutes, 12 minutes past 12. So some of our friends have already left because they have other obligations. So unless somebody has a burning desire to share or to ask a question, we could leave it here. And if you have any comments or questions that you want to share, please, by all means, send them to Greg and me, and we will share them with everyone. I think this is a wonderful conversation that's just begun. We have the rest of the year to continue to discuss this. This is very close to our hearts. Each and every one of us has a special place for these vows, precepts, and ethics of the Buddhist traditions. So I'm sure we have a lot more to share.
John Banyan, my last comment on the for universal Bodhisattva vows. I think being in the Asian tradition, lives after lives are in our bones. So when we take that for Bodhisattva vows, we look past our current life through future lives and until we reach enlightenment. So when you first take a look at that, you see that very fast and deep, but if you take it from that viewpoint, it's carry on to eons of your lives. Then that's how we look at those vows. But I think the the way the Western tradition look, it's very practical because how we apply that into our current life here in our current situation, instead of looking too far apart and miss the point that what we need to do now. John Banyao.
Thank you.
And Elena, it's Deborah.
Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just do have like a burning thing I want to say. I want
Sure.
to thank all of our presenters. It was fabulous. And I want to acknowledge something you said, which I think encapsulates this, which is that I think it's about internalizing the vows, having them be part of us, then they become that we live them. So thank you. Bowing out.
Thank you. Conrad? No? Okay. So I want to thank Jeff, John, and Richard. Thank you so much. My heart is filled with gratefulness to you for the wonderful teachings. I'm sure this will carry us along for the next few months.